1. The impossible death and the psychological horror. Imagine a man who survived enough poison to drop 10 war elephants, took a bullet directly into his chest at point-blank range, had his skull shattered and still possessed enough demonic rage to strangle his killer with his bare hands. This wasn't a Hollywood horror film. This was the horrific last hour of Grigori Rasputin, an unwashed, illiterate peasant who turned the court of the Tsars inside out and shattered a 300-year-old empire. On the freezing night of December 30th, 1916, beneath the grand palace of Prince Felix Yusupov, a sinister execution was taking place inside a soundproof stone cellar. Prince Yusupov stood shaking, his palms dripping with cold sweat, staring in absolute psychological terror as Rasputin calmly devoured for cyanide-laced cakes down to glasses of poisoned wine. The poison was meant to agonizingly paralyze his organs within seconds. Yet Rasputin simply burped, wiped grease onto his sleeve, and complained with a crooked smile that the pastries were far too sweet, pushed past the brink of sanity by the sheer naturalness of the scene. Yusupov drew his Browning pistol, aimed at the beating heart under Rasputin's velvet shirt, and pulled the trigger. Rasputin collapsed onto the Persian rug with a hollow thud, dark blood pooling beneath his chest. The aristocratic conspirators gasped in relief, convincing themselves that the nightmare was finally over. But as Yusupov knelt down to inspect the corpse, the dead man's fingers twitched violently. His bloodshot eyes snapped open, pure, unadulterated malice radiating from his pupils. Rasputin lunged upward like a wounded beast, foaming at the mouth as he hissed, "You dirty traitor! You think a little piece of lead can send Rasputin to hell?" Breaking free from the crazed grip, Yusupov fled in horror as Rasputin dragged his bleeding body out into the snowstorm, forcing the conspirators to track him like a wild animal, smash his skull with iron bars, and dump his writhing body into the icy Neva River. When investigators pulled his frozen corpse from the water days later, the autopsy revealed the most disturbing truth. There was water in his lungs, proving that after poison, for bullets in a fractured skull, he was still breathing when he sank into the abyss. Was Grigori Rasputin a holy man possessed by divine providence, or a master manipulator who exploited a mother's desperation to destroy Russia from within? Part 2. The Siberian Desolation and the Heresy of Sin. To understand the psychological engine behind his power, we must look into the bleak, endless snowscapes of Pokrovskoye, a forgotten Siberian village where life was cheap and brutally cold. Rasputin grew up surrounded by utter despair, illiterate, neglected, and trapped in an environment where alcoholism and violence were the only escape from the biting frost. Beaten bloody by villagers after stealing horses, lying battered on the frozen mud, young Rasputin stared into the gray sky, tortured by existential. Where is God in this wasteland? Yet beneath his rough exterior lay an unnerving emotional intelligence. He possessed an uncanny ability to read human body language and exploit vulnerability. When he touched sick animals or feverish villagers, his calm, low-frequency voice induced a hypnotic state that quieted their nervous systems, instantly relieving their pain. Driven by an intense internal fever he couldn't control, Rasputin abandoned his wife and children to wander thousands of miles across Russia on foot, searching for spiritual meaning. In the deep forests, he encountered the Klisti outlawed, radical sect that rejected the formal rigidness of the Orthodox Church. Their leader taught him a dark, liberating dogma: you cannot repent if you have not sinned. The deeper you plummet into the abyss of sin, the more glorious your eventual salvation will be. This twisted philosophy rationalized every inner impulse Rasputin possessed. He realized that lust, wild drunkenness, and spiritual zeal were not opposites, but two sides of the same coin. Equipped with this potent mix of raw charisma, hypnotic skill, and holy justification, the unwashed peasant set his sights on the aristocratic parlors of St. Petersburg. Part 3. The Mother's Desperation and the Medical Illusion. By 1905, the Russian aristocracy was decaying from the inside, bored, decadent, and obsessed with spiritualism, senses, and dark mysticism to fill their empty lives. Into this fragile, perfumed world walked Rasputin, reeking of barnyards, eyes burning with intense conviction, offering something the polite clergy never could: raw, unfiltered spiritual power. But his true ascent into absolute authority was forged not by mysticism, but by the devastating personal tragedy hidden behind the gold leaf doors of the Winter Palace. Crown Prince Alexei, the long-awaited male heir to the 300-year-old Romanov dynasty, was born with hemophilia, genetic curse that prevented his blood from clotting. A simple trip or a minor internal bleed would cause agonizing pressure in his joints, causing the young boy to scream in excruciating agony for days on end. Empress Alexandra watched her child writhe in pain, helpless and guilt-ridden, knowing that she had passed this fatal genetic flaw down to her son. Sleep-deprived, isolated, and mentally breaking down, Alexandra prayed frantically to God, "Take my crown, take my life, but stop my child's suffering." In that moment of complete psychological vulnerability, Rasputin was brought to the royal nursery, dismissing the arrogant royal physicians who stood helpless by the bed. Rasputin leaned over the screaming child, took his tiny hand, and spoke in a deep, commanding, yet soothing whisper, "Look at me, my little one. The pain is leaving your body. Sleep now." Within minutes, the boy's breathing slowed. His muscles relaxed, his fever broke, and the internal bleeding inexplicably stopped. To Empress Alexandra, this was not science, it was a literal miracle. She fell to her knees, weeping, believing God had sent a holy peasant to protect her son and save the dynasty. Modern science, however, reveals a tragic irony. The court doctors had been treating Alexei with aspirin, a new drug at the time whose thin blood side effect was unknown, actively worsening the boy's internal bleeding. Rasputin simply banned the doctors and their medicines from the room, allowing the boy's body to heal naturally while his hypnotic presence calmed the child's elevated blood pressure. Rasputin immediately grasped the immense leverage he now held. He smiled into his beard, realizing that as long as he kept the heir alive, he owned the mind of the Empress and through her, the entire Russian Empire. Part 4. The Puppet Master and the Fall of an Empire. Tsar Nicholas II was a gentle, devoted family man, but an indecisive, weak ruler incapable of standing up to his desperate wife. Whenever ministers tried to warn Nicholas about Rasputin's growing corrupt influence, Alexandra would fly into a rage, screaming that to betray Rasputin was to condemn their son to death. Broken by guilt and family strain, Nicholas surrendered state decisions to keep peace at home, sighing, "Better 10 Rasputins than one hysterically weeping empress." When World War I erupted in 1914 and Nicholas went to the front lines, Rasputin became the de facto ruler of Russia alongside Alexandra, sitting in royal armchairs with muddy boots, holding court with a bottle of wine in one hand. Rasputin appointed and dismissed high government officials on a whim. If a minister refused to bow to him or criticized his lifestyle, Rasputin had him fired within hours, replacing experienced statesmen with incompetent yes-men who bought his favor. In just 2 years, Russia went through for prime ministers, 6 interior ministers, and 3 war ministers, paralyzing the country during its greatest military crisis, while Russian soldiers starved and freezing. Muddy trenches without rifles or boots, Rasputin turned his residence into a site of endless, debauched parties, aristocratic women, seeking divine favor or political access for their husbands lined up outside his door, completely captivated by his hypnotic dominance. Rasputin's brazen arrogance reached its peak when he began boasting about his intimate control over the Empress, sparking dark rumors across the nation. In the freezing streets of Petrograd, starving citizens queued for hours for a single loaf of bread, passing around satirical cartoons depicting the Tsar and Empress as literal puppets on Rasputin's lap. The sacred bond between the Russian people and their little father Tsar was shattered forever, not by revolutionaries, but by the shadow of an unwashed monk watching the country slide into anarchy. Prince Felix Yusupov and a group of royal patriots made a desperate resolve: if the Tsar will not save Russia from this monster, we will. Part 5. The Blood Curse and the Unstoppable Dominoes. Days before his fateful night at the Yusupov Palace, Rasputin penned a chilling, eerie letter to Tsar Nicholas II, a document that reads less like a letter and more like a curse written in blood. He wrote, "I feel that I shall leave life before the 1st of January. If I am killed by common peasants, you have nothing to fear. But if I am killed by nobles, by your relatives, then hear my words. Within 2 years, not one of your family, not one of your children will remain alive. The Russian people will rise up, and your entire bloodline will be slaughtered." When the news of Rasputin's body being pulled from the Neva reached the palace, Alexandra collapsed into total hysteria, while Tsar Nicholas II sat frozen in silent, paralyzed dread. The prophecy unfolded with terrifying, mathematical precision. Exactly 10 weeks after Rasputin's death, popular rage exploded into the February Revolution. Abandoned by his own army commanders, Tsar Nicholas II was forced to abdicate his throne. The 300-year Romanov reign ended in a matter of days. Stripped of their wealth, titles, and power, the royal family was arrested and shipped under armed guard to the bitter cold of Siberia, the exact region where Rasputin was born. On the night of July 17th, royal family was forced down into a dark, stone basement in Yekaterinburg. In a hail of smoke, gunfire, and screams, Nicholas, Alexandra, their 4 daughters, and young Alexei were executed without trial. Rasputin's deathbed curse had consumed the entire empire. Was Grigori Rasputin a malignant parasite who single-handedly destroyed Russia? Or was he merely a mirror reflecting the terminal rot of a dying dynasty? As the icy waters of history wash over his legacy, one truth remains: no single peasant ever walked the earth who left a more terrifying, dark mark on the fate of millions. What do you think? Was Rasputin driven by genuine supernatural foresight? Or was he just an exceptionally brilliant con man who got lucky with history? Share your perspective in the comments below.